Hi, I'm Neil Christensen, author of Dark White and Malcolm Karma Cold Turkey, and you're watching another of my sporadic episodes of I'm Reading House of Leaves, so you don't have to. Today we're covering Chapter 18. Karen goes back to the house. We all knew she had to eventually, but I think that the fact that Karen did finally leave New York and go back to Virginia and to the house is a testament to how much she loves her husband. Arguably, too much. She even says directly to the camera that she's not going back for herself. I'm going because of Nabby. So, on April 9th, Karen heads south to Virginia, but instead of going directly to the house, makes an appointment with Alicia Rosenbaum, the real estate agent. Together, they kind of ruminate a bit about the state of the Navidsons' marriage. Karen admits that she hasn't seen Will in 6 months, and they may end up having to get divorced. Alicia seems sympathetic to Karen and tries to offer her some cold comfort. Don't worry about the house. It always sells. This strange wording catches Karen off guard. Alicia goes on to explain that she did some research and found that nobody really ever lives in the house very long. In fact, it's had 20 owners in the past 50 years. She suggests that she thought it might be haunted, but can't find any evidence of that. There's no reported sightings of ghosts or anything supernatural, and she even checked to see if it was buried on an old Indian burial ground, a la Poltergeist, but no such luck. The one thing she did find is that it had been there since the original Jamestown colony. Zampano seems to find this more interesting as Karen did, or even I did, because he spends like a page recounting the history of the Jamestown colony. Johnny doesn't seem that interested in it either. He's more fascinated or annoyed by the use of lowercase f's to replace s's in some of the historical documentation. It bothers him so much that just out of spite, he goes on to spend the rest of his section replacing almost all, but not all, of his lowercase s's with lowercase f's. In those pages, he tells us that he's finally being evicted from his apartment for lack of payment. He has put some money together, though, by finally selling his mother's locket. Not the chain, though, just the locket piece. And I think this really speaks to not only his desperation, but an increasing amount of dissociation. He's getting further and further away from his own personal values and identity. Then he sends himself on sort of this like farewell tour. He visits the tattoo shop that he used to work at to say goodbye to everybody there, including his old boss. His old boss seems somewhat relieved that he's going to be going away. He was also hoping to run into Thumper there, but she wasn't there. So Johnny gave his former employer an envelope to give to Thumper and threatened bodily harm if it was not delivered. Johnny then moves on to finding Lude, who seems to have disappeared into thin air. He scours all their usual haunts, all their usual places. Lude is nowhere to be found until finally a reluctant bouncer tells Johnny that Lude is in the hospital after being assaulted. Johnny goes to visit Lude and finds him in terrible shape, beaten to within an inch of his life. By way of explanation, Lude tells Johnny that it was the Gdansk man who beat him up. Now, I had to go back and look up the Gdansk man because after how many pages and how many countless rambling side stories, I frankly couldn't remember. But thankfully, again, this book has an index. And the Gdansk man ends up being from way back in the beginning of the book, page 88 and 89. The boyfriend of Kyrie, which was one of the girls he hooked up with, the one that they drove up into the hills and had sex in her car, and then she dropped him off and started crying and drove away. So she had told her boyfriend that Johnny had accosted her in a grocery store recently. Well, since Johnny was nowhere to be found, hiding in his apartment, Gdansk man finds Lude, knows that they're friends, and just beats the shit out of Lude to prove a point, I guess. Johnny's incensed. He wants to go and find him and just kill him to death. Kill him to death, yeah. And Lude tells him, no, stop. Don't worry about it. He says, this is the best thing that could have ever happened. He says, apparently Gdansk man had just come into or inherited or something, just a huge amount of money. And Lude's already talked to lawyers and they're going to sue him for the assault, collect all the money, and then he's going to take Johnny. They're going to go to Vegas and put it all on red. So with that, Johnny packs up what little he has into a storage unit, keeps a couple things with him, including 2 handguns, a rifle, and some ammunition, packs those into his car, and heads out to go find the house. Johnny wants to see this house. After this, Karen finally heads over to the house, but not until like 9:30 at night. And after approaching the door, unlocking the door, opening the door to find 6 months worth of mail scattered across the floor and the power apparently turned off, she makes the fairly reasonable decision to not be a cliche, not walk in alone into the haunted house in the middle of the night without power working, and instead leaves and comes back in the morning. When she gets back in the morning, the power seems to be working again. The house is back to normal. There's no mysterious hallways in the closet downstairs. The bookshelf upstairs is flush with the wall the way it should be. And there's no passageway between the master bedroom and the kids' room. The house is normal. So after a couple more nights of sleeping in a motel, she finally decides she's going to move back into the house. And boy, does she move back in. Like, all the way in, cleaning up things, reorganizing, gardening outside, taking care of the house. She turns back on all the motion detectors for the cameras, reloads tapes into all the Hi8 cameras, and generally makes sure everything is back the way that her husband had left it. And then she writes in journals all day. Writes in journals. None of the cameras can see what she's writing, and it's never provided to the readership, but they do say that the cameras just catch her sitting and writing in journals all day. Until a few days later, she hears something. And she's convinced that it's Will. She thinks she hears Will calling, or at least speaking through the walls of the house. So what does she do? She calls Billy Reston. And Billy Reston comes over. But of course, while he's there, nothing happens. Also, the cameras in the house never pick up any voices coming through the walls. So she stays and continues to hear the voices, usually late at night, but at various different times. And then one day, she finds in the children's room, born out of nowhere, Navidson's clothes, remnants of his pack and sleeping bag, and scattered across the floor, from corner to corner, cartridges of film, boxes of 16mm, and easily a dozen videotapes. She locates an AC adapter, plugs in a Hi8, and begins rewinding one of the newly discovered tapes. The angle from the room-mounted camcorder does not provide a view of her Hi8 screen. Only Karen's face is visible. Unfortunately, for some reason, she's also slightly out of focus. In fact, the only thing in focus is the wall behind her, where some of Daisy and Chad's drawings still hang. The shot lasts an uncomfortable 15 seconds, until abruptly, that immutable surface disappears. In less than a blink, the white wall, along with the drawings, secured with yellowing Scotch tape, vanishes into inky black. Since Karen faces the opposite direction, she fails to notice the change. Instead, her attention remains fixed on the high 8, which has just finished rewinding the tape. But even as she pushes play, the yawn of dark does not waver. In fact, it almost seems to be waiting for her, for the moment when she will finally divert her attention from the tiny screen and catch sight of the horror looming behind her, which, of course, is exactly what she does do when she finds out the videotape shows. And that's it. It ends in the middle of that sentence. Even if I didn't know that this was chapter 18 of 23 and we were coming up on the end, I could tell you easily that this feels like a penultimate chapter. This feels like we are approaching the climax, that this is where the story comes together and we get our answers. Now, obviously, I know 18 of 23 is not penultimate. That's not what that means. Please don't come for me in the comments. I'm just saying it's that feeling. It's that sense. Between Johnny leaving and going to Virginia in search of answers at the house, and Karen's powerful return to the house and discovery of Navidson's tapes, and the epic, jaw-dropping imagery of the wall behind her vanishing and revealing the ever-present inky abyss, the void behind her. This chapter has all the hallmarks of the climax of a book. Now, being chapter 18 of 23, that means that we still have 5 chapters, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 5 chapters left, right? And that makes sense. We have at least 3 stories that we have to wrap up. We have to wrap up the Navidson story, which is, the primary narrative of the book. We have to wrap up something about Zampano and his, whole, journey putting together all this material. And of course, Johnny and what happens with him and his sanity and the book and all of that. Anyone would have a hard time wrapping up that much material in just 1 chapter or 5 chapters even. But especially this book, where it rambles on and on and on and goes off on tangents and stream of consciousness, and you just never know what anyone's talking about half the time. I mean, it is very aggressive to have this whole thing wrapped up in 5 more chapters. But that's what happens. So join me next time on I'm Reading House of Leaves So You Don't Have to for chapter 19.